So a brief period of time before I was a council communist, I was a technocrat, but I never really sat with me the elitist nature of a technocracy. You know, some people better than another and all that sort of stuff, and I was still largely pro-democracy to some extent. And so, you know, right around 2022, I created a channel because I figured that, you know, through good enough reason, and the times had politically changed, that, you know, you could reason with people with the right ideas and they would listen. And I kind of abandoned my old thinking in realizing that, you know, people are not reasonable creatures. They're not reasonable. They're not rational in a sense either. They have interests, and that's what they can be reasoned with. But the thing is people are not objectively reasonable. So I was going into a Discord server because I wanted to chat about some interesting ideas. And this one was like a left-leaning Discord server. And I figured we'd kind of hit it off is because, you know, honestly, it's like, you know, who isn't tired of, you know, right-wingers or some shit? And so I talked to a couple of people there, and they were like, you know, right-wingers deny climate change is this horrible, horrible thing. And I was like, you know, that's pretty bad and all that sorts of stuff, right? And I said, you know, I agree with you, but I also have a problem with like the broader left is because a lot of the times they don't want to actually embrace actual technological solutions to fix climate change. They just want to whine to show that they care about an issue, but they never want to conveniently solve it. They always like to complain about an issue, but they'll find every excuse not to actually pursue a solution to it. And so I said, the real only solution that you could, you know, use to stop climate change, if you wanted to have zero carbon emission energy generation, is nuclear fission power. Solar and wind are great, but, you know, they cannot be used as a mainline power supplies because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. And, you know, battery storage is great, but it's not there yet. And so, you know, they were consistently trying to be nitpicky about nuclear fission power. And I said, hey, you know, nuclear fission power is a good solution is because it has about 10 to the 8 times more energy per unit mass as opposed to coal or gasoline. And none of the power that you get from that is emitted, none of the pollution from that is through carbon dioxide, which seems to be a big atmospheric problem. And so, you know, I started getting into it, and they were like, what about radioactive half-lives and how long that lasts? And I said, I want to throw you an interesting fact about radioactive materials, okay? Because the thing is, I keep saying, like, how do we protect people from, you know, radioactive materials that are going to last a gorillion thousand years? And I said, well, fun fact, if a half-life is like a gorillion thousand years, it's probably not a very radioactive substance, is because, you know, if you've ever seen the graph between viruses on lethality and spreadability, you know, a virus is not able to be lethal and spreadable at the same time. It's because if it's overly lethal, it just kills its host before it can propagate to another host. And if it's spreadable, you know, then, you know, it's not as lethal. And so there's an inverse relationship. I don't know what the rule is particularly called, nor do I particularly care. Now, a similar thing exists between radioactivity and half-lives. You know, the longer the half-life it has, you know, the less radioactive it's going to be is because less particles. Because the half-life, what is the half-life definitionally? The half-life of a radioactive material is saying, you know, how much time does it take for half of the atoms within that sample to decay, okay? And if it has a really long half-life, then it's going to take a really long time for something to decay, or even half the particles within that sample to decay. And thus, it is less radioactive. And so the thing is it's not so much whether or not something cannot be radioactive, highly radioactive, and also have a really long half-life at the same time. And I pointed out that you know, a lot of the elements, say for the Fukushima instance, you know, the ones that are radioactive, you know, decayed within about a month, and then they were no longer present in the atmosphere. But the thing is, every once in a while, it's just like COVID, because it was a spreadable but also lethal enough virus to really be considered an annoying pandemic, is that you can have elements on the table, and I think iodine-137 or something like that, is where it has a half-life of 10 years, so it's radioactive enough that it is a pain in the ass, but at the same time, it also has a long enough half-life that it doesn't just disappear from the environment. Because if something has a half-life that's like, you know, a couple of days, you know, it's not going to last very long, and it's going to decay into something else, and it's never going to be heard of ever again. It's because it's going to just decay. And so, you know, rather than acknowledge this fact, they're like, how do you know this is true? And I'm just like, what do you mean, how do I know this is true? Like, every element, you know, either has a recorded half-life or it's stable. And I said, you know, even theoretically, the proton has a half-life. And so, therefore, like, you know, technically everything has a half-life, and some protons, even though they're, like, considered stable, are not as actually stable. And I started pointing out the island of stability within, you know, nuclear physics. And I kind of sat there, and I was pointing this out, and they're like, well, the island of stability is a theoretical conception. I was like, what are you trying to make here? Are you trying to bolster my argument that everything has a half-life and you shouldn't be worried about things just because they have really long half-lives? No, they just wanted to basically nitpick at everything because they didn't even know what fucking argument they were making, and they just wanted to basically take a shot at an argument. And I was like, there's no fucking argument with it. They're like, the island of stability and, like, you know, this nuclear chart is like, you know, a theoretical conception. I'm like, no, these are empirical measurements of the half-life of, like, almost every isotope permutation known to modern science. It's not theoretical, it's an empirical fucking fact. And I kind of sat there debating these people who were so convinced that climate change was the most important thing of our time that they did not want to say, you know what, I'm going to suck your dick, Alistair. We need to have nuclear fission power and stop environmental destruction right now. They wanted to argue and make up bullshit about how this chart about half-lives of different isotope permutations was a theoretical conception and therefore it's not a valid argument. I was like, okay, so you're not actually interested in solutions to climate change. You just want to fucking, you know, pick a bone with something that you don't agree with because you want to bitch about something, but you don't actually want solutions. And that is why I can't stand the vast majority of the left. I cannot stand the vast majority of people, is because this person is going to literally tell me, after complaining about how climate change is like the most legitimate existential threat that we have to solve right this very fucking second, that he would cut off his left nut for a solution, that all of a sudden he's nitpicking me over an empirical table on whether or not it's just a theoretical conception or something real. That's when I realized, holy shit, it's not right-wingers that are, you know, upset, that are really the problem for denying climate change. It's fucking leftists who know that climate change is real, but they don't want to actually take the necessary steps to actually mitigate it. They just want to bitch fucking whine. I was like, are you fucking serious? No, the right problem isn't the right, is because they can believe whatever they want. They're going to do their own thing. But the real problem is the left, is because a lot of the times they have a problem and they don't want to find a solution. You know, it's like, AOC, like a couple of years ago. She goes on her fucking little TikTok channel like, oh my god, climate change is important. Everyone has to know about it right this very fucking second. And I'm like, okay, if I were to throw you in the position of power of being an absolute dictator, what would you do in the next 30 days to actually fix climate change? Half of these fucking midwits that talk about how they want to solve climate change, and all of a sudden they don't have answers. And I asked them, what technical means do you have to solve climate change right this very fucking second? It's like, imagine yourself as dictator of the United States, and you have absolute power to do whatever you fucking want, and people are ready, just chomping at the bit to follow your orders. What is your solution? You know, my liege, what is your solution to this problem? What do we do? And I said straight up, you know, he didn't have an answer and stuff like that. He's like, it's straight up, right now, the first thing I'd be investing in is 500 nuclear fission power plants to actually power the entire United States at current capacity, okay? And I would still continue on with, you know, electric vehicles and incentivizing people to buy those instead, is because that's another step. Once that infrastructure is set up and people are driving electric vehicles, it's just a matter of time to upgrade the grid and move it to a nuclear fission-based power supply, and then have nuclear wind and solar cut down usage of nuclear fuel. And that would be a completely zero CO2 emission energy generation grid. That would be the answer, okay? And it would be that simple. 500 nuclear fission power plants to power the entire United States. The United States has 100 currently in active operation right now. And so if you just, and that composes about supplying about 20% of the power. So obviously just multiply that by 5 and there you go. You have your 500 nuclear fission power plants to power the entire United States. Okay. Then you need to start converting everything to electrical. Okay. So now we need to upgrade our energy grid. Honestly, I'm a big fan of like high voltage DC power lines, is because the fact is DC is an incredibly simple power source. You know, you can power it from anywhere. And on top of that, at long distances, HVDC is actually very efficient. It's much more efficient than transmitting AC power, I believe beyond 70 kilometers. Or it's either 70 or 70,000 kilometers. I don't remember, because like I haven't read that paper in a long time, but it is just more energetically efficient to do that. Okay. Once people are driving electric vehicles, I would start trying to redesign our cities, especially high density centers. And a lot of people, yeah, I know I'm a country boy. Why am I talking about cities and all that sort of stuff, right? But the thing is, 80% of people live in the cities. Okay, and so the thing is that these cities have to be designed for efficiency and quality of life. Okay, but they're not. They're designed to maximize profit and just foot the bill and offset any kind of cost straight up to the worker, which is for some reason American capitalism has tolerated for quite some time. You know, district cooling. That's an interesting one. When you want to cut down energy usage, district cooling and heating of entire cities. You know, because the thing is, if you're just sticking an air conditioner out of your window and you're just dumping the heat on the street, that's contributing to a greenhouse effect within the cities. You can even look at cities, they're just much hotter than the surrounding environments, right? Well, with district cooling, where you have one centralized, you know, AC unit you know, outside the city that is basically using chilled waters, which is no different than a moderate heat exchanger to go into these cities for temperature control, well, then there you go. Maybe chilled water down to 40 degrees. I don't think anybody wants to have their place colder than 40 degrees. And if you do, then you can import an actual AC unit into your property. But I think this would be cheaper and more convenient for the vast majority of people. Right? And some cities do this. Chicago does do this. But the thing is, we can go so much bigger if we just have the political will and ambitions to this, right? The problem is, and this is why I've considered myself the platonic prophet of the United States, is that people are fucking stupid. And you might say, well, how do you know you're so smarty and all that sorts of stuff? Because I have multiple backgrounds in STEM. I actually understand the science behind the sorts of stuff. So I think I have the right to be a little bit elitist whenever some jackass retard is telling me that the isotope permutation half-life table in nuclear physics is a theoretical conception and not an empirical one. I have the right to say your opinion is not equal to mine if you're going to basically talk about such an emergency that's an impending doom for all of humanity. Because if you think your opinion is equal to mine, you're a fucking retard, dude. Stop pretending your opinion is equal to mine if you're a fucking pot-smoking midwit who lives in your mother's basement. Okay? If you want solutions to an actual problem, listen to the experts and just shut up and follow in line. If you don't, that's your prerogative too. Other civilizations don't have to follow your bullshit. This is why the United States is falling behind to China, is because we'd rather value EQ over IQ, sociological gaslights, and soft skills over actually real technical skills that benefit human civilization. With that being said, I think I've had my rant about this sorts of stuff. I ranted a little bit in the last video about the HRification of the entire United States. I mean, you could see the Coldplay concert where HR is, you know, directly in the CEO's pocket. You know, they're political commissars of the corporations. You know, it's all fine and dandy, but I do consider these people to be an active tumor on human society, is because the fact is because they're the ones pulling the streets, and they are the king, which nothing can get done without their permission. They are actively responsible for the detriment of the United States. They're actively a parasitic tumor on the United States, is because their stupidity and arrogance in combination with each other is basically preventing anything from actually getting done that is to the benefit of this civilization. They would rather gaslight and lie about it, which is why I hold them responsible for everything that is going down and transpiring in the United States. In fact, I might actually make a dedicated video because I want to showcase all the neat technologies that I find absolutely fascinating about China, is because the fact is I want to dangle it over your head to show you what you could have with the right people in charge. And it's not these sociologists, it's not these marketers, it's not these HR tards, it's not these soft skill people whose only value that they bring to human civilization is gaslighting. It's people with real technical talent. People who build things, engineers, scientists, doctors, blue-collar workers, millers, weldsmen, HVAC techs, electricians. These people are what build the foundations of civilization and will deliver you to a better future. Not the gaslighters, deceivers, and soft skill retards who only are good at telling people and deceiving people. These people will never deliver a prosperous future. And the sooner we wake up to that fact, you know, the sooner we can start building a better tomorrow. That's my take. But that's what I found. More often than not, people want to find a reason to bitch and complain about something and not get solutions. I found that in both political circles, more often not on the left than on the right. Because I still remember watching a video of Jordan Peterson arguing with a climate activist, and she was talking about, we need to stop climate change, we need to all unite, and then she's like, unite to do what? He's like, unite to do what? You can't even agree on nuclear fission power, and that's the most feasible solution there is, but you want everybody to unite to do what? So you can pat each other on the back and make yourselves feel good, like that you feel like you're organizing, you're doing something, bro? Really? Just so you can feel good. Not actually deliver real concrete solutions. Maybe that's my engineer brain saying that, but that's something I've noticed with so many people. They want to feel good, okay? They don't want to actually do something good. They don't want to change something, okay? And maybe that might be something that's going to contribute to the overall demise of the United States because of its stupidity. And maybe that's something that happens to every empire, and maybe I should just accept that personally, because I think most third worlders would probably say that when I'm doing this ranting and raving about this sort of stuff about my country. Maybe this is just a natural life cycle of every empire, and that this is just inevitable, and there's really nothing I can do, no matter how much I want to preach in the microphone. And to some degree, I do believe that they're right, is because when I look at the numbers and statistics of this channel, you know, these idiots are busy watching these popular content creators bitch and whine about things that they can never seemingly find solutions about. And so they just want to feel good, and they don't want to actually have actual solutions. And so the numbers don't lie. You know, people very much get the rulers that they deserve. My rant's over.